"They never react," her mother whispered. But when the little girl in the wheelchair saluted, that royal guard did break protocol. Before we reveal the full story, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from now. Let's dive in. Buckingham Palace basked beneath a rare London sun, the kind that makes even the grumpiest locals smile and tourists forget about their aching feet. By mid-morning, the gates were already lined 3 deep with visitors from every corner of the world. Tour guides waved tiny Union Jacks like miniature flagpoles. Children bounced on parents' shoulders and 1,000 phones hovered in the air. Everyone desperate to capture that perfect royal moment. The changing of the guard was minutes away, and you could practically feel the excitement rippling through the crowd behind those famous palace gates. Sergeant Callum Rock stood motionless, adjusting his grip on his rifle with the kind of precision that comes from years of practice. His boots were planted with perfect symmetry on the stone courtyard, not a centimeter out of place. The morning light caught the polish on his brass buttons, sending little sunbursts dancing across the courtyard. 12 years he'd served in the regiment. 4 of those in ceremonial duties. He'd stood through driving rain, blistering heat, and the endless parade of tourists who thought maybe, just maybe, they'd be the one to make him crack. They never did. Among his fellow guards, Rowe had earned himself a bit of a reputation. 2 things defined him: unmatched discipline and a quiet intensity that could silence even the rowdiest stag party without uttering a single word. He didn't twitch, he didn't blink, he didn't break. Not for camera flashes blinding his eyes, not for drunk tourists shouting in his face. Not even that time. A sobbing American woman begged him for just one tiny smile for her Instagram. His commanding officer once watched him stand perfectly still for over 2 hours while climate protesters chanted inches from his face. Textbook control. The captain had called it later. Rohr had simply shrugged and called it his job. But even he couldn't have known that today, this perfectly ordinary, sun-drenched morning, he would face a test no training manual could prepare him for. And the thing is, it wouldn't come from a security threat or a protocol breach, but from the smallest soldier he'd ever seen. And all she would do was salute near the front rail, wedged between a boisterous German family taking selfies and a dad hoisting a sugar-high toddler on his shoulders, sat a little girl in a motorized wheelchair. Emily Clark was 8 years old, wearing a navy blue dress with a crisp Peter Pan collar and a red poppy pin carefully fastened over her heart. A small Union Jack flag rested in her lap, but she wasn't waving it around like the other kids. No, her eyes were locked on the gravel parade route where the guards would march by any minute. Her right hand rested in her lap, fingers slightly curled, not from nervousness, but from pure muscle memory. She'd been practicing that hand position for weeks in front of her bedroom mirror. Behind her wheelchair stood her mother, Rachel, the kind of woman whose entire posture spoke of quiet resilience, worn-out sneakers, dark circles under her eyes, but a gaze that missed absolutely nothing. She gave her daughter's shoulder a gentle squeeze, smiling down at her, though something in her eyes suggested she was bracing herself for disappointment. "Remember what we talked about, love?" Rachel said softly. "They're not allowed to react even if they see you." "I know," Emily replied, her voice light but surprisingly determined for an 8-year-old, "but I still want to salute anyway, just once." Rachel crouched down beside the wheelchair, brushing a stray curl behind Emily's ear. "Well, for what it's worth, you've got a better salute than half the cadets I have ever seen." "That's because I practiced loads," Emily said matter-of-factly, "for when it matters." Rachel glanced nervously at the growing crowd pressing in around them. She flinched slightly as a man stepped back without looking, bumping against the wheelchair. Without even noticing, with practiced patience, she gently maneuvered Emily's chair back a few inches, reclaiming that small bubble of space that was constantly under threat. "They're coming," someone whispered excitedly from the front row. Emily sat up straighter, suddenly alert. Her small fingers flexed once at her side, a tiny gesture that spoke volumes about the effort behind it. She'd watched dozens of YouTube videos of this ceremony, memorized every move, but nothing compared to actually being here, feeling the anticipation in the air, the buzz of the crowd, the weight of tradition. Her eyes were fixed on the archway ahead, searching, waiting. The sound hit them first, that unmistakable rhythm of boots striking stone in perfect unison, like a heartbeat made of leather and polished marble. Then they appeared emerging from beneath the central arch in formation, so perfect. It seemed almost inhuman, a wall of scarlet tunics and towering black bear-skin caps. The crowd collectively leaned forward, camera clicks replacing conversation as awe settled over everyone. Emily held her breath. She didn't dare blink Sergeant Callum. Rock marched near the front rifle angled precisely across his chest, with the kind of accuracy only thousands of repetitions can achieve. His eyes, barely visible beneath the shadow of his bear-skin hat, scanned the perimeter with practiced efficiency. He saw everything while appearing to look at nothing, a skill that had served him well both on ceremonial duty and in combat. And that's when he saw her at the exact moment Emily raised her hand, palm open, elbow at the perfect angle, and delivered. The sharp textbook salute she'd been rehearsing in her bedroom for weeks. The moment floated between them. Suspended in time, Rock's face didn't move a muscle, not a glance, not a nod, not even the slightest twitch of recognition. He continued forward, arms swinging in perfect cadence with the other guards, as if nothing had happened at all. But Emily had caught something, or maybe she'd just imagined it. A tiny flicker so small it might not have been real in the guards' eyes as they swept past. Her as if for just a split second he'd truly seen her. Not as a child in a wheelchair, not as just another face in the crowd, but as someone who mattered. Emily lowered her hand slowly, still holding her perfect form, a beat longer than necessary. She finally relaxed her arm and smiled to herself, a private moment of victory. "I think he saw me, Mom," she whispered. Rachel squeezed her shoulder without saying anything. Not wanting to break the spell, someone behind them chuckled softly. "Oh, that's cute," a woman murmured to her companion. "She thinks they're actually paying attention to her." But here's the thing. Rock was paying attention behind that marble-carved expression. The image of her perfect little salute was playing on repeat in his mind. Her eyes had locked onto him with a seriousness he rarely saw even in grown men there. Was something about the deliberate way she'd held her hand, the careful angle of her elbow, something that wouldn't let go of him, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Callum Rock felt something crack beneath his perfect discipline. The ceremonial band transitioned smoothly into their second piece as the guards began their circuit around the inner courtyard. Tourists shuffled their feet, jostling for better viewing positions. Emily didn't move an inch still, as a statue entirely. Focused Roar's path would bring him back around soon with each precise step he was doing. Mental calculations measuring exactly how many paces until he'd pass her position again. His expression never changed. Arms swinging, eyes forward. Pace, metronomic, but inside a clock was ticking. Emily straightened her spine and lifted her chin slightly as the line of scarlet coats approached again. She raised her hand once more and executed the same clean salute, crisp, confident, absolutely deliberate again. Roe gave no outward response, and yet this time he allowed himself the smallest shift in his gaze, so subtle that not even his fellow guards would notice, just enough to properly take in her posture, the almost uniform-like presentation of her dress, the slight tremor in her outstretched fingers that revealed the physical effort behind the gesture. She wasn't frantically waving or jumping for attention like the other children. She wasn't making faces or shouting his way. She was giving something. Respect. Acknowledgement. One soldier to another. The guards continued their march without breaking stride. "Still trying, huh?" said a man standing nearby, smiling down at Emily with that patronizing expression adults reserve for children's earnest efforts. "You've got persistence, I'll give you that." Rachel gave him a tight smile but kept her focus on her daughter. Emily was still holding her salute hand raised even longer than before. This wasn't about getting attention anymore. It was about doing something right, even if no one noticed, as Roar marched on something unexpected, flickered through his mind, a memory he hadn't visited in years. A hospital room, his younger sister Sarah sitting up in a wheelchair the day before his first deployment, insisting on saluting him properly when he visited in uniform. Her hand had trembled with effort. Two she'd passed before he made it home. The memory landed heavier than he expected, like a stone dropped in still water. Rock's feet continued their perfect rhythm, but something fundamental had shifted. His focus now included the little girl on the rail, not as a distraction from duty, but as a central part of the landscape he was trained to protect. He couldn't look directly at her. He couldn't nod or smile, but on the next pass, he made a microscopic adjustment to his path, just enough to ensure she would be directly in his field of vision. A sudden commotion rippled through the spectators as a group of rowdy teenagers, clearly part of some school trip, pushed their way toward the front barriers. Backpacks knocked against shoulders. A boy with spiky hair held a half-empty Frappuccino dangerously close to Emily's chair. "Careful," Rachel said sharply, stepping forward to block the drink from spilling on her daughter. The teenager barely looked her way. "Sorry," he muttered, slurping his drink while already turning his phone. "To take a selfie with the guards in the background, didn't see her there?" Rachel's smile was razor thin. "That's because you didn't look?" Emily remained quiet through the exchange. Her hands gripped the armrests of her chair, not out of fear, but to stop herself from reacting. She didn't want to make a scene, not now, not after connecting with the guard. Even if only in her imagination from 50 FT away, Roar had seen the entire interaction. Even through the shifting bodies and constant motion, his trained eye had caught the mother's protective stance. The rigid set of the girl's shoulders, the wheelchair had been jostled, nearly hit by the careless teenager. Vulnerable, exposed, his military instincts sparked to life again. Assess. Register, prioritize. To the rest of the crowd, it was nothing. A minor moment, a child almost bumped in a busy public space. But to Roar, it registered as a breach of something fundamental, not because she needed special treatment or pity, but because she'd done everything, right? She'd acknowledged the uniform with precision and respect, and been met with carelessness, even danger that just didn't sit right with him back in formation. He made a minute adjustment to his stride length, the kind of change only another guard would notice on the next circuit. His path would take him directly in front of her position. It wasn't against protocol. Not technically, but it was deliberate in a way that his movements rarely were. He mentally noted the terrain slight dip. In the gravel near her chair, dense crowd pressing from behind visibility from his commander's position. Limited, he could afford one movement, just one. Emily smoothed the flag in her lap with surprising care. Rachel knelt beside her and whispered, "You doing okay, love? We can take a break if you're getting tired." Emily shook her head, eyes never leaving the red-coated figures approaching once more. "He's coming back," she said simply. Rachel followed her gaze, puzzled. "How can you possibly know that?" "I just do," Emily whispered, absolute certainty in her voice. The band shifted into a higher tempo, the ceremonial crescendo that marked the midpoint of the changing of the guard. Tourists pressed forward eagerly, phones raised for what everyone knew would be the most Instagram-worthy moment of the ceremony. Emily's hand was already moving. She saluted once more, this time higher, steadier than before. Her arm visibly trembled from the effort, but she held it as if everything in the world depended on this one perfect gesture, and maybe in some small way, it did. Sergeant Callum's boots struck the gravel path in perfect time with his unit, but inside his mind, the decision had already crystallized. Something about that salute had burrowed under his skin 3 times now. Precise earnest dismissed by the crowd, but not by him. The other guards would maintain formation. The commanding officer wouldn't notice. But Roe carried a promise made long ago to a little sister, with the same determined eyes and the same hard-won strength as he approached his path, brought him within 6 FT of Emily's wheelchair. For one electric moment he slowed, not enough for a civilian to detect, but enough for the weight of the moment to build. Then, in a move that broke no written regulation but violated every unspoken rule of his profession, he turned his head slightly, but unmistakably, his eyes met Emily's directly. And then he saluted her back, a full, formal, immaculate Royal Guard salute. Arm extended, chin raised, elbow at regulation angle, absolutely perfect in its execution. The crowd's reaction was immediate. A collective gasp, audible even over the brass band and drums. Several phones lowered in shock. A woman nearby whispered urgently, "Did that just happen? Did you see that?" Rachel's hand flew to her mouth. Emily froze in place, eyes huge with disbelief, unsure whether to drop her salute or hold it. Roar completed the motion with military precision and resumed his march without missing a beat, expression once again an unreadable mask. But something fundamental had changed. Something that mattered the moment lasted mere seconds. The band played on, the ceremony continued. But every single person standing near that front rail knew they'd just witnessed something that wasn't part of the scheduled performance. Emily lowered her arms slowly, her mouth open in pure wonder. "He did it?" she breathed. "He really did it." A hush fell over the front row, spreading outward like ripples in still water. For several long seconds, no one seemed to know what to do next. Tourists stared at each other, phones suspended, mid-recording children. Unusually quiet, as if everyone was collectively trying to process what they'd just seen. He saluted her. Someone finally said, "The guard actually saluted her." Rachel turned to her daughter, her expression a mixture of amazement and pride. "Emily, he really saw you." Emily's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I told you, Mom," she whispered. "I knew he would." An older gentleman standing nearby lowered his expensive camera and shook his head in quiet admiration. "Been coming to these ceremonies since the 80s, he said to no one in particular. "Never seen anything like that before, not once." His wife nodded in agreement, and she deserved it too. "Did you see that salute of hers, perfect form, like she'd been practicing her whole life for this moment?" Even the group of teenagers had stopped their constant phone checking. Long enough to exchange impressed glances. "She saluted better than we did in cadet training," one of them admitted. Meanwhile, back in formation, the other guards maintained their positions with absolute discipline. But a subtle tension had rippled through their ranks. They'd seen it, all of them had, and while not a single one moved or reacted visibly, the shock had traveled through the unit like an electric current behind the scenes. A palace security officer touched his earpiece and murmured discreetly into his lapel microphone, "We've had an unscheduled interaction from Guard 5. Just noting it for the log from a distance. Everything appeared normal." Tourists lined the barriers. Guards marched in. Perfect time music rose and fell in stately cadence. But at the center of it all stood a little girl who had done nothing more complicated than offer a salute, and a soldier who had decided that just this once, that was enough to break with centuries of tradition. And now everyone was watching. What would happen next? The ceremony concluded exactly as it always did. Marches completed, guards rotated the courtyard, returned to ceremonial stillness. But beneath that perfect order, tension buzzed like a live wire the moment Sergeant Callum Rock stepped behind the palace gates. A junior officer intercepted him with a face carved from stone. "Guard room now," he said quietly. Rock said nothing, only adjusted his rifle and followed without argument. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken reprimand. No dramatic shouting, no slamming doors, just the heavy silence as Captain Edwin Stratton stood with his hands clasped behind his back. Everyone in the regiment knew Stratton as the ultimate stickler for protocol, the kind of officer who once wrote up a guard for blinking too frequently during a royal inspection. "You know why you're here," Stratton said, his voice carefully neutral. Roar met his gaze directly. "Yes, sir." You saluted a civilian during active formation in full view of at least 100 witnesses. Yes, sir. Stratton raised a single eyebrow. Would you care to explain yourself? Sergeant Rock paused, choosing his words with care. She wasn't just any civilian, sir, 8 years old in a wheelchair. She saluted 3 separate times with flawless form. The kind of respect we rarely get from anyone these days, let alone a child, and she deserved acknowledgement. Sir Stratton studied him for a long moment. You're aware of the potential consequences. Social media's already picked it up. The footage is circulating online as we speak. I am aware, sir. You understand that by the book. What you did constitutes a breach of ceremonial discipline. I do, sir. Another long silence filled the room. Stratton leaned forward slightly. You've never broken formation before. Row not once in 12 years of service. Rock nodded once. Not until today. Sir Stratton exhaled slowly, his expression unreadable. You do realize there is no specific regulation forbidding what you did, but we maintain standards through consistency, through tradition. I understand that, sir, and yet you chose to salute her. Anyway, she reminded me of my sister. Rock said quietly, the words hanging in the air between them, and frankly, sir, she reminded me of exactly the kind of dignity this uniform is meant to stand for. Stratton didn't immediately respond. Then he turned, away his back to Rock, and said in a voice almost too soft to hear, Just don't make a habit of it, Sergeant. No, sir, dismissed. Rock delivered a perfect regulation salute, crisp and clean, before exiting the room with quiet certainty burning. In his chest outside, the crowd had mostly dispersed, though a few families lingered near the gates, hoping for one last photo opportunity. Rachel was carefully guiding Emily's wheelchair toward the exit when a professional-look woman in a dark blazer stepped into their path. Mrs. Clark, she asked politely. Rachel looked up startled. Yes, I'm with the palace staff. The woman explained, her tone warm but businesslike. Would you and your daughter be willing to meet one of the guards? He's just finished his duty shift. Rachel glanced toward the palace gates, then back to Emily, whose eyes had gone wide as saucers. Is that allowed? Rachel asked cautiously. Not ordinarily, the woman admitted with a small smile. But today we're making an exception. 10 minutes later, they were being escorted along a quiet gravel pathway through a side garden, a part of the palace grounds tourists rarely got to see beyond a tall hedge, and through a small row iron gate stood Sergeant Callum Rock. He'd removed his bare skin cap and ceremonial red coat, now dressed in a formal but more relaxed uniform shirt. Without the imposing headgear and rigid parade posture, he seemed more human. Somehow still composed, still dignified but approachable. When Emily spotted him, she went completely still. Her small hands gripped the armrests of her wheelchair. The Union Jack flag still clutched tightly in her fingers. Rock stepped forward and crouched down beside her, not towering over her, not looking down, but meeting her at eye level. That was the finest salute I've received in all my years of service, he said quietly. You made it very difficult not to break protocol. Emily blinked rapidly, then whispered, But you did break it. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Yes, I did. Rachel swallowed hard, watching as her daughter leaned forward slightly in her chair and confessed in a small voice, I thought maybe no one would notice me in this big crowd. I noticed, Roar said simply, and I won't forget. They sat together on a stone bench tucked away from the ceremonial paths, Sergeant Rock on one end, Emily's wheelchair positioned beside him, her flag still held carefully in her lap, like something precious. Rachel stood nearby, close enough to hear, but giving them space. Her arms were wrapped around herself, not defensively, but as if trying to contain the emotions of the moment. This wasn't exactly how she'd expected their day at Buckingham Palace to turn out. Do you always have to stand that still? Emily asked, looking up at him curiously. That's the job. Roar replied with a hint of warmth in his voice. Doesn't mean it's always easy, though. I think I could do it, she said thoughtfully. My legs don't work very well, so I'm pretty good at sitting still for a long time. Roar studied her face. For a moment, standing tall and sitting strong aren't all that different when you think about it. That made Emily smile a real smile that lit up her whole face when I was little. I wanted to be in the army. She told him Mom says I still can just, not exactly the way I thought. Your mom's absolutely right. Rock said service comes in all different forms. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply show up and be seen for who you really are. He reached into the inside pocket of his folded coat and pulled out a small rectangular patch, deep red fabric embroidered with the Royal Regiment's insignia. This isn't something we hand out to tourists. Thou, he said, his tone serious, but I think you've more than earned it. Emily stared at it in disbelief. Is it really real? As real as they come? He placed it gently in her hand. She turned it over carefully, examining every thread and detail, as if memorizing it. Then she looked up at him with those determined eyes and asked, "Can I salute you one more time?" "I'd be honored," he replied, straightening his posture instinctively. Emily raised her hand again, just like before, clean, steady, full of quiet dignity that seemed far beyond her years, and for the second time that day, Sergeant Callum Rock returned it without hesitation. Rachel quickly wiped her eyes before either of them could notice as they said their goodbyes. Roar gave Emily a nod that conveyed more than words ever could, and as she wheeled away down the garden path, flag in one hand, regiment patch in the other, she called back over her shoulder, "You stood up for me today." I'll always remember that Roar watched her go, the afternoon sun behind her, casting her shadow long and steady across the gravel pathway. He knew he would remember it too. What would you have done if you were in Sergeant Rock's position, followed protocol to the letter, or returned that perfect salute? Have you ever witnessed a child show that kind of quiet determination in public? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. And if this story touched your heart, please give it a thumbs up. It really does help more people discover stories like this one. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you'll be first to see tomorrow's Royal Guard story when it drops.